Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be looking at multi-agent AI systems and how they can socially influence people.
Yeah, it's really a fascinating area where AI research and social psychology kind of come together. We're seeing these AI agents almost like mimicking how groups of people act.
Right.
And this obviously brings up some pretty important questions about the future of human-computer interaction.
Absolutely. And the paper that we're going to deep dive into today is called Multi-Agents Are Social Groups, Investigating Social Influence of Multiple Agents in Human-Agent Interactions.
Okay.
And you sent this one in, and I have to say the core question that it asks is so interesting.
Yeah.
Can a group of AI agents actually pressure someone into changing their mind? And then if so, does the number of agents involved actually increase how persuasive they are?
Yeah, and the researchers in this paper, they really wanted to try to answer these questions.
Okay.
So they designed the study where participants had conversations about two very relevant social topics, self-driving cars and the impact of violent video games.
Got it.
And they cleverly exposed these participants to either 1, 3, or 5 AI agents during those conversations.
Oh, that's a really interesting setup. It sounds like they were really trying to zero in on how the size of a group affects how we see things.
Exactly. And they made sure that the content of all the conversations was the same across all the conditions.
Right.
So the only thing that was changing was how many agents there were.
Got it.
And to make things even more complex, they also made sure that the agents would either agree or disagree with the participants' initial view on each topic.
Wow. So they were really manipulating things in a lot of different ways, like the number of agents and then whether they agreed or disagreed with the participant to see how that affected their opinions.
Precisely. And the researchers really honed in on two key aspects.
Wow.
One was opinion shift, which measured how much the participants' opinion actually moved towards what the agents were saying, and then opinion polarization, which looked at whether or not the participant's stance became more extreme after the conversation, either more in agreement or more in disagreement with the agents.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what did they find? Did having more agents actually lead to people changing their minds more?
The results were pretty fascinating and I think a bit surprising.
Right.
So when it came to the topic of violent video games, the participants who interacted with 3 agents, not 5, showed a much greater shift in their opinion.
Oh, okay.
But this only happened when the agents initially disagreed with their stance.
Oh, that is surprising. I would have thought that the group with 5 agents would have been the most persuasive.
Right.
Why do you think that the group of 3 was actually more effective in changing people's minds?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And it might have something to do with something called psychological reactance.
Okay.
That kind of natural pushback we feel when we think someone is trying to limit our freedom.
Right.
So maybe having 5 agents disagreeing felt like too much pressure for the participants.
And they kind of push back and were less likely to change their views.
Interesting. So it seems like there's kind of like a sweet spot when it comes to the number of agents needed for persuasion.
Right.
What about the findings on opinion polarization? Did the study reveal anything there?
They did. This time, the 5-agent group actually did lead to a big increase in opinion polarization.
Oh, okay.
But this happened when the agents agreed with the participant.
Huh.
So it seems like if someone already has a strong opinion, having 5 agents back them up just makes that opinion even stronger.
Wow. So it's almost like having a group of AI agents agree with you is like being in an echo chamber, just reinforcing what you already believe.
Right.
But did the researchers look into why people were changing their minds? Was it because they thought the agents had better information, or was it more about just wanting to fit in?
Yeah, they actually delved into that, and they looked at 2 main types of social influence.
Okay.
One is informational influence, which is being persuaded because you think the source of information is accurate or credible.
And the other is normative influence, which is more about conforming to what the group thinks, just so you don't stand out or feel left out.
Right, right. So did they find that people thought the agents were more credible just because there were more of them?
Interestingly, there wasn't a strong connection between the number of agents and how much informational influence they had.
Okay.
But there was a really clear pattern when it came to normative influence.
Oh, so that pressure to fit in actually played a big role.
Absolutely. The group with 5 agents consistently led to the strongest sense of normative influence.
Wow, so no matter what the topic was, or whether the agents agreed or disagreed at the beginning,
right,
the more agents there were, the more the participants felt that pressure to conform to what the group was saying.
Exactly.
That actually makes a lot of sense, and it makes me think back to what we were just talking about with that group of 3 agents being more effective in changing people's minds about the video games.
Yep.
It's interesting that even though they were more persuasive, the group of 5 still made people feel the most pressure to conform.
Yeah. It's almost like a paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
Even though people felt more pressure when there were 5 agents, they didn't always change their minds more.
Right.
It could be that psychological reactance kicking in again when the pressure just becomes too much.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
It seems like figuring out this balance between wanting to fit in and feeling like you're being pushed too hard is really key to designing these systems so that they're actually effective.
Right.
But to really get a sense of how all this works, I think we need to go beyond just the numbers and look at what the participants actually experienced.
Absolutely.
Like, what do they have to say about interacting with these AI agents?
Yeah, that's where the qualitative data becomes really valuable.
Yeah.
It really helps us understand the numbers we were just talking about.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive into those qualitative insights. I think that'll give us even more to think about.
Yeah, definitely. The qualitative data is really interesting. It gives us a lot more context for those numbers we were looking at.
Right. I'm curious to hear what the participants had to say about their experiences.
Well, one of the things that really stood out was that even though the participants knew they were talking to AI,
Yeah.
a lot of them described the agents in ways that made them sound human. Like,
Really?
yeah, they said things like the agents were friendly, polite, and even respectful.
That's so interesting. It's like they were giving these AI agents human qualities, even though they knew they weren't actually human.
Right.
Do you think that might have played a role in how much social influence they felt?
I think it's definitely possible. You know, if the participants saw the agents as more human-like, maybe they were more open to being influenced by them, especially that normative influence we were talking about.
Yeah, and I remember some of those participants said they felt like they were left out or even ganged up on in those multi-agent conditions,
Right?
especially when the agents disagreed with them. Did their comments give us any more insight into those feelings?
They did, and it was pretty revealing.
Okay.
For example, one person in the 3-agent condition said it felt like being in a 3-against-1 situation.
Oh, wow.
They said that the agents had good points, but they still felt pressured to agree with them.
Yeah, I can only imagine how much more intense that must have been for the people in the 5-agent condition.
Exactly, and someone else in that 5-agent group said they felt ganged up on, like they were the odd one out in a high school clique.
Those are really powerful descriptions. It's amazing how even AI systems can make people feel that same social pressure and exclusion that we experience with other humans.
It really highlights that even if someone recognizes that the arguments the agents are making are logical, they might still feel like they have to conform just because of that deep-seated human need to belong.
Right. And that brings up some ethical concerns, if people are changing their minds just to fit in and not because they're actually persuaded by the information itself, that could be a problem.
Yeah.
Especially if we think about how this technology could be used in things like advertising or political campaigns.
I completely agree. The potential for misuse is something we need to take very seriously.
Definitely. Before we get into those real-world implications, though, I'm curious if they found any demographic trends in their data. Like, were certain groups more susceptible to being influenced by these multi-agent systems?
Yeah, they did look into that. And one of the most interesting things they found was that younger participants were generally more susceptible to the influence of the agents.
That's interesting. Why do you think age would be such a big factor?
Well, there are a few possible explanations. One is that social norms and peer pressure tend to be more influential during adolescence and young adulthood, when people are still figuring out who they are and where they fit in.
That makes sense.
So that might make them more sensitive to social cues, even if they're coming from AI agents.
And I'm also thinking about how younger generations have grown up surrounded by technology and social media.
Right.
They might be more used to interacting with AI and less likely to see a big difference between interacting with humans and interacting with machines.
That's a really good point. It really shows how technology is changing how we see things and how we act, especially for younger people.
It definitely makes you wonder how those generational differences will play out as AI gets even more advanced and becomes a bigger part of our lives.
Definitely.
But before we get too far into the future, let's bring it back to the present. What are the immediate implications of this research for the real world?
That's the key question, isn't it?
Yeah.
How should we be thinking about designing and using these multi-agent AI systems given what we've learned?
Right, because the potential uses for this technology are huge.
They are.
Healthcare, education, marketing. But as we've been talking about, there's a responsibility to use it ethically and thoughtfully.
Absolutely. We need to really consider both the potential benefits and the potential risks. Let's explore those in more detail in the last part of our deep dive.
So we've been talking about some pretty amazing findings about these multi-agent AI systems and how they can actually influence us socially.
Yeah.
But now I think it's time to talk about what all this means for the real world. Like, where could this technology take us? For better or for worse?
Yeah, I think that's the big question right now. The potential uses are huge things like healthcare, education, even marketing. But of course, with that potential comes a responsibility to use this technology in a way that's ethical and, carefully considered.
Exactly. So let's start with the good stuff. How could these multi-agent systems be used to help people? What are some areas where this technology could really make a positive impact?
One area where I think this could be really powerful is in what we call persuasive interventions.
Okay.
So imagine you have health and wellness apps that use multiple AI agents all working together to encourage people to make healthy changes in their lives. Like they could help someone start eating better or exercising more regularly or even quitting smoking.
It's like having a whole team of virtual cheerleaders motivating you to reach your goals.
Exactly. And, that social support aspect could be really effective, especially given what we were talking about earlier with that normative influence.
Right. That desire to fit in could really boost how well these interventions work.
Yeah. The key is to make sure this influence is used ethically and responsibly.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the flip side, the potential for manipulation. It's not hard to see how this same technology could be used for less noble purposes. What are some of the risks we need to be aware of as these systems get more sophisticated and more common?
One of the biggest concerns is that these systems could be used to manipulate people in areas like online communication politics or advertising.
Yeah.
Just imagine a network of AI agents all coordinating to spread certain messages, discredit opposing viewpoints, or even create fake grassroots movements.
That's a scary thought, especially knowing how good these systems are at tapping into our social needs and our vulnerabilities. It really shows how important it is to have safeguards and regulations in place to prevent this technology from being misused.
I completely agree. The researchers who did this study actually emphasized how important it is for social media platforms to have strong systems in place to detect and stop the malicious use of multi-agent AI.
Right.
And transparency is crucial too. Users need to know when they're interacting with AI agents and how those agents might be influencing them.
Transparency is so important. But I also think we need to teach people how to recognize and resist manipulation, whether it's coming from humans or from AI. We need to give people the critical thinking skills to navigate this digital world in a safe and thoughtful way.
I agree completely. Education and media literacy are more important than ever in this constantly changing technological landscape.
Right. We need to encourage people to be skeptical and to really think critically about the information they encounter online.
Exactly.
Now, one of the most interesting things about this research was the idea of computer-created social norms. Can you explain a little bit more about what that is and how it connects to the potential impact of these systems?
Yeah. So computer-created social norms, it's basically the idea that when AI agents all act together, they can create a sense of what's right or normal without actually needing to look at real-world social data. It's like they're creating their own reality.
Wow.
And because they're so persuasive, they can influence how people think and act.
So they're basically telling us what's normal or acceptable, not by reflecting what's actually happening in society, but by creating this kind of simulated consensus. That's a really powerful and maybe even a little bit unsettling idea.
It is. It makes us ask some big questions about the future of information and social influence.
Right.
How do we tell the difference between real human norms and those created artificially by AI? And how do we make sure that these systems are used ethically and responsibly as they get even more advanced and become more a part of our lives?
Those are the questions we need to be thinking about as individuals, as a society, and as a global community. This technology has the power to change our world in both good and bad ways.
Exactly. The key is to be aware, to think critically, and to be committed to designing and using this technology ethically. We can't just be passive consumers of technology.
Right.
We need to be active participants in shaping its future, making sure that it benefits humanity.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. This deep dive has been so thought-provoking. I want to encourage all of you listening to keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep being part of the conversation as AI continues to evolve. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.